All right, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. Today is day one of the August 2026 Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council meeting. My name's Joe Semino. I'm the current chair. We'll see how that goes. Starting off with elections this morning. I'll give a few notes. Also, thanks to Philly for being a great host as always, even though we're just getting started. So we did have a closed session for executive committee. We are looking to fill a seat for the SSC. It will be to fill a portion of a term that Mark Holliday had left open when he resigned from the SSC. The executive committee does have a recommendation, and that will be coming to the full council later in the week. So we'll see how that goes as well. And so, as I mentioned, we'll get into the swearing in of new and reappointed council members. And so with that, there are a couple notes, one of which is Lori Nolan is not able to be here in person, although I believe Lori is listening in. And I know Lori wanted to be here, and so apologies, Lori, that you were unable to make it. We also have one new member that was appointed but not able to do the swearing this week. So with that, we do also have some other reappointments. And so I'll turn it over to the regional administrator, Mike Pentney, whenever you're ready. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to stand up, and I'm going to ask if Warren, Bobby, and Paul can stand, and we will take care of swearing in Dave Blazer and Lori Nolan at the October meeting, unless they're needed for a committee meeting, in which case I can swear them in over the phone. Also, I don't have certificates for you all today, but hopefully maybe I'll have them for you in October. But if you could just, I'll read, you don't need to have your mics on, but I'll read. If you could just read along with me when I say state your names, say your name, not state your name. And we can get you all sworn in. So if you could just follow along. I state your name. As a duly appointed member of a regional fishery management council. Established, you can read along with me, established under the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, hereby promise to conserve and manage the living marine resources of the United States of America by carrying out the business of the council for the greatest overall benefit of the nation. I recognize my responsibility to serve as a knowledgeable and experienced trustee of the nation's marine fisheries resources, being careful to balance competing private or regional interests, and always aware and protective of the public interest in those resources. I commit myself to uphold the provisions, standards, and requirements of the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act and other applicable law, and shall conduct myself at all times according to the rules of conduct prescribed by the Secretary of Commerce. This oath is given freely and without mental reservation or purpose of evasion. Congratulations, you're now council members. Yeah.
Despite the fact that that sounded like a round of happy birthday at my house. Congratulations, all of you. So let me just make some notes for folks. Warren Elliott has been appointed for Pennsylvania. For those of you that don't know Warren, you haven't been around very long because because Warren is rejoining us. He termed out after many years on the council, including a term as vice chair, or a time as vice chair, excuse me. So Warren, it's great to have you back. I don't think we need to tell you that filling Michelle Duvall's seat, even though it was yours previously, is that's big shoes to fill. When the room is quiet, Michelle always had a question, and somebody needs to fill that role. So just putting that out there, that might be you. Bobby Rule was reappointed from North Carolina, Paul Reese from New York. So glad to have you guys back. And as we mentioned, Lori and Dave Blazer from Maryland, Lori from New York will be sworn in at the October meeting. So welcome and thank you all. Really appreciate that. Okay, so next up, election of officers. So we'll be doing election of the chair and then vice chair. I will turn it over to general counsel. I think John usually has a little spiel and then he'll turn it over to the chair of the nominating committee, which I always thought was kind of redundant, Joe, since you are the nominating committee. But I'll turn it over to John Almeida. John, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize, I'm not in the room with you all. Some family situations required me to stay in Gloucester this week. Hopefully we can pull this off with me remote. We're going to now conduct the elections for the positions of chair and vice chair in accordance with the procedures described in the council's statement of organization, practices, and procedures. To start with, I'd ask Joe Grist, the chair of the nominating committee, for the nominations that he's received for both positions, chair and vice chair.
Thank you, John. Nominating committee has received one nomination for chair in Joe Cimino and one nomination for vice chair in Skip Feller.
Thanks, Joe. We'll turn first to the chair position. And at this point, I will call for any additional nominations from the floor from voting members of the council for the position of council chair. Are there any additional nominations for chair? Please use the raise hand function to indicate if you'd like to nominate someone for the position of council chair. I don't see any raised hands, so I will ask Joe Grist, are there any raised physical hands in the room?
There are no raised physical hands in the room.
Thank you. Hearing none, I declare nominations for the position of council chair closed, and where we only have one nominated candidate, by operation of council rules on elections, Joe Cimino is hereby elected by acclamation. Congratulations, Joe. And at this point, we'll turn to the position of vice chair. In addition to the nomination of Skip Feller, do any voting council members wish to present any additional nominees for the position of vice chair? If there are any additional nominees, please use the raised hand function. I don't see any. Joe, anyone in the room raising their hand?
No raised hands in the room.
Thank you. So hearing no additional nominations, I declare nominations for the position of vice chair are closed. And again, where there is only one nominated candidate, by operation of the council rules on elections, Skip Feller, as the sole candidate, is hereby elected by acclamation. Congratulations, Skip.
Well, thank you, John. Much appreciated. I don't know if there's anything else you need to add.
I think we're all set for the year.
All right. All right. Well, we'll check in again with you later. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone. Much appreciated for the vote of confidence. It has truly been an honor and a pleasure to serve with Skip and Chris and this amazing staff. We will get to work on moving forward our very busy agendas. Skip, I don't know if you had anything to add.
I just want to thank everybody again and happy to be here with y'all.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Well, we will move on to our next order of business. We have Jessica. Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. We have some folks visiting that we're going to give a few minutes to. So I'll turn it over to Chris. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we go, before we turn it over to Jessica for Surf Clams, I want to introduce two folks from Iceland. They're associated with a company called Greenfish. I won't even attempt to pronounce this this guy's name. I met him this morning. Welcome. So everyone received an email from me about this company. Basically, it is involved with fish prediction models. Certainly very, I had a lot of interest from you all when I sent that email out. Unfortunately, we didn't have time for a full presentation from these guys, but I thought if they could be here today to interact with the folks that were interested and maybe even stick around tonight for beer, maybe that could work. So with that, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for welcoming us here. Congratulations to the new council members and officers. Yes, so my name is Baldur. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Greenfish. I'm joined by Andri, who's a part of our sales team. I thought this could be an interesting addition here at this conference because what Greenfish does is that we're taking data that's been historically used in regulatory purposes, collected for regulatory purposes, and mainly used in meetings like these to talk about allocation of quota and a lot of other stuff. And we saw an opportunity to use this same data in a much different purpose, on a more short-term basis, to help fisheries operate more efficiently, make better use of the data that they're collecting, whether that be for regulatory or for their own sake. We're using this data in a whole other way to help them optimize their operations, catch more fish more efficiently, which I believe is something that we all agree is a good, would be a good thing. I'm not gonna take more of your time. We have a busy schedule, but we'll stick around for the day and feel free to come talk to us if you want to learn more about what we're doing. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Much appreciated. And yeah, I think if you guys have a chance to stick around, hopefully some council members can catch up with you. So I appreciate that. Anna, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just curious, since I was looking at the schedule and we have a slot open from 4:30 to 5, I didn't know if that would be an opportunity to give these guys a chance to talk to us a little bit more in detail.
You always think that you have an opening for, later in the day, but you never know. So I think both of them have indicated to me that they're going to be sticking around all day. Certainly if we have some time later, if we get done early, I don't think we have any problem with them using their slide deck to tell us about their company and their product. If not, they will be around for hospitality and you guys can talk to them informally.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. And with that, we will get started on the agenda for this August meeting. So we're going to start with the 2027-2028 Surf Clam and Ocean Quahog specs. I'll turn it over to Jessica when you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. We just need to get it up on the screen. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the 2027 and 2028 measures for both surf clams and ocean quahogs. I just want to remind you all that we had a specifications package in place for both species that extended from 2021 to 2026, but those specifications are going to expire. So today you're going to develop new recommendations and we're going to review updated information on the fishery, as well as review advisory panel, staff, and scientific and statistical committee recommendations for those 27-28 measures. So for 2026, we received some updated data and other information to be reviewed. We received a commercial data update that was produced by the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, and we also received some data pieces from GARFO, Greater Atlantic Regional Fisheries Office, and this updated information through 2025, what was available for both species. For ocean quahog, we received projections that were updated to include 2027 and 2028, so we could set management measures based on those. I'll remind everyone our last management track assessment for ocean quahog was in 2020, and that was used to set the entire 2021 to 2026 specs period that was previously set. And for surf clam, we received a management track assessment in 2024, and that was used to set measures, revised measures for 2025 and 2026, and the SSC had previously provided 2027 and 2028 OFLs and ABCs that we have on hand. There are no future assessments that are currently scheduled for these clam species, and there were no clam surveys that were conducted in 2025 or 2026. So I'm going to start out with surf clam, and this information is based on the management track assessment through 2024, so it includes data through 2023. So based on that information, surf clam is not overfished, although the target level of the biomass is just slightly below the target level, and overfishing is not occurring, so the exploitation rate is below the threshold. Total landings information was also provided for surf clam. The black line on this graph is the EEZ landings for surf clam. So you see we've seen a decline in overall landings from about the mid-2000s to the most recent years. In our data update, the landings information is also broken out by area using the EVTR, the vessel trip report data that has that area information. So starting with that purple color, that's Southern Virginia, and Delmarva is in blue, teal is in New Jersey. You can see historically that was a large dominant part of the total landings. Long Island is in green, Southern New England in yellow, and then Georges Bank is provided in black. So you can see over time the shift away from the high landings in Southern Virginia and Delmarva in the 80s, and those are lower contributors now. In recent years, New Jersey, Long Island, and Southern New England and Georges Bank is where most of the landings are occurring. Landings per unit effort was also provided, and this is broken out by individual area, and a total overall landings per unit effort is the black solid line. So you can see from the mid 80s through recent years, we see an overall general decline in landings per unit effort. Earlier in the time series, it was between about 150 to 200 bushels per hour is what was being landed. And in recent years, it's around 40 bushels per hour on average. And this is averaged across all areas throughout the fishing year. For the current year landings, surf clam data through July 30 was available. So that dark blue line is the 2026 landings to date. Landings are just slightly higher than the golden line on the graph, which were the 2025 landings. And that green line is the quota rationing trajectory line. So if the quota were taken at a completely steady rate throughout the fishing year, those landing levels would lay on top of that line. So landings have been substantially lower than the quota. For the dealer and vessel information, because of the confidentiality issues in a highly consolidated fishery, We've aggregated this information for both surf clams and ocean quahogs combined so that we're able to report it out to you. So for 2025, there were 55 vessels that landed either surf clam, ocean quahog, or both surf clam and ocean quahog. That's down 2 vessels from 2024. There were 13 dealers of surf clam and ocean quahog. I'll note that these 13 dealers, some of those dealers are part of the same firm. So there's a smaller number of firms than the total number of dealers reported here. And in terms of ex-vessel value, about $24 million worth of surf clam was landed in 2025. This is less than the inflation adjusted $60 million that was landed back in 2003. There's a number of survey and data challenges in this fishery. As I noted on my second slide, there was no survey conducted in 2025 or 2026. The survey collects much needed biological information for the stock assessment. It's a length-based stock assessment, so it uses length composition data. So without that survey information, the very limited port sampling is not a very good substitute. For that, they also collect age information in order to determine growth rates and other things that feed into the stock assessment. So that is presently not being collected, and it's not certain when the next survey or assessment is going to be conducted for these fisheries. I'm going to shift gears. So we had all that information provided. We developed our fishery information documents and took those to our advisory panel to develop their fisheries performance report for 2026. So the advisors met on July 7th. They were asked a series of trigger questions and presented with some of the same information I've provided to you. And our advisors wrote a detailed performance report that's available in your materials. They identified several critical issues and other important issues. So those are the issues I'm going to touch on in my presentation. I'll also note that the advisors indicated they would like to see status quo quotas for upcoming fishing years because they appreciate the fishery and market stability that it provides for them. So the first critical issue they noted was the clam surveys. They requested that the center resume clam surveys with a number of consecutive legs to collect that information as soon as possible. They noted that they have concerns about preserving their Marine Stewardship Council certification when they're up for recertification, that they will not be recertified if they don't have a stock assessment for these fisheries. And they also noted that that information is needed to support the Scientific and Statistical Committee catch limit determinations. The other critical issue that they noted relates to the Great South Channel habitat management area. So this is an area in off of southern New England. The New England Fishery Management Council established this habitat management area through their omnibus essential fish habitat amendment. As a follow-on action to that amendment, they did a framework which identified a number of clam access areas within that Great South Channel habitat management area, so some specific areas that they're able to fish. The fishing in some of those areas hasn't been as good as some of the fishermen had expected. And they've highlighted that they'd really like the council to support the New England Council reopening the Great South Channel habitat management area, citing that these closures were put in place over the protection of cod, and they feel that some of these areas are really non-viable cod spawning grounds. The advisors also noted that a petition was sent by some of the industry members to the Secretary of Commerce requesting the reopening of that area. So those are the two critical issues. Other important issues that were highlighted, Georges Bank biotoxin closures. So back in the 90s, there were closures put in place to protect shellfish and the public due to public health needs because of paralytic shellfish poisoning concerns within those areas. In the, I think it was around 2010 or 2013, there were biotoxin protocols that were developed that would allow fishing in those closed areas if the fishing vessels followed these specific protocols, where they go through a process of at-sea testing, so an initial at-sea test for PSP prior to fishing. And then when they bring the product back shoreside, there is a laboratory test that's conducted to look for PSP before the product can be released to be sold to the public. So those protocols are very expensive, and those areas have been operating over those protocols for a long period. The FDA and NOAA Seafood Inspection has been going through a process to revise their regulations and their processes for these areas and how they're managed for public health. So moving from a permit access area to these biotoxin controlled access areas. So the advisory panel is requesting that the council resend its letter to the Food and Drug Administration requesting an update on this. And that resend, the council requested an update from the FDA in 2023. They provided an update from us. So they were asking that letter to be dusted off and resent to them to get an update. Another topic, foreign import issues, that these imports from Canada are really creating pressure on their marketplace, that it's a lower cost product that's been entering the marketplace. They noted concerns about access to undersized surf clams off of Delmarva. So in our minimum size calculations for the coast to determine if the minimum shell length for surf clam can be suspended, there's a calculations that is done to see what % of the landings are clams lower than the 4.5-inch minimum size. There's a request that came in about removing these areas from those calculations because industry has indicated they feel these are slow growing, high density surf clams, and they'd like to be able to fish on those. But if they do fish on them, they'll be included in the calculation and they could potentially trigger the limit by which the regional administrator can't suspend the minimum size. So that's been raised as a concern. And they also noted in their fishery performance report that the co-occurrence issue, that is currently being addressed through the species separation requirement amendment and work to implement those regulations. And they also request that the advisors be convened jointly with any fishery management action team or AP meetings that occur on any issues related to surf clams or ocean quahogs. So there's more detail in that fishery performance report, but the performance report and all of this other information was passed on to the Scientific and Statistical Committee when they met in July. And the SSC developed their recommendations for surf clams. As I noted, the SSC previously identified OFLs and ABCs based on that 2024 management track. So we already had numbers that they had identified at that time. So the SSC reviewed those surf clam values and they affirmed their prior recommendations. And those recommendations were based on an SSC modified overfishing limit distribution. It was the tier 1 OFL CV of 100% based on that management track assessment. So the staff also recommended the annual catch limits and quotas for 2027 be kept the same as the last specification cycle. Status quo quotas, the same as 2021 to 2026 would be 26,218 metric tons per year. So if we maintain status quo, those would be carried forward into 2027 and 2028. Staff also recommended continued suspension of the minimum shell length standard for 2026. Based on the prior analysis that was done for the regional administrator to evaluate this last year, 10.5% of the coastwide surf clams that were landed to date from August 2025 to July 2026 were undersized. So that is below that 30% threshold at which the regional administrator can suspend the minimum size. So just to remind everyone of the general flow for our catch limits for this species, the SSC discussed the overfishing limit and acceptable biological catch. So they affirmed those previous recommendations they developed for surf clams, the ones that they reviewed. In general, we have set the annual catch limit for surf clam equal to the ABC. This is because the ACL cannot exceed that ABC level. And in this fishery, we've set an annual catch target for the fishery. So based on all of those recommendations, moving from left to right, you've got the OFL and ABCs that were previously recommended. The middle column, ACL set equal to ABC. And then starting on the right-hand side, building up, you have the commercial quota, that 26,218 metric tons, and then applying an incidental mortality rate to those levels of 12% incidental mortality, which is the clams that die from the dredge running over them on the bottom, that sums to produce that ACT annual catch target of 29,363 metric tons. And that ACT is substantially less than the ACL as a soft target. Okay, so those are all the values. And my slides are not advancing. Okay. So for decision points for this year, the 2027 and 2028 surf clam specifications, as a council, you have to determine what you'd like to recommend and also determine if you'd like to request the suspension of the surf clam minimum shell length. That recommendation would go in, and then the regional administrator, they generally evaluate the information that's available to make that determination at the time those measures go in place. So if there's any questions, I can take those now.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Let's do that. First, I'll start around the table. Questions from council members. Rich Wong, and then I'll go to Jim Gilmore.
Thank you, Jessica. Could you remind us why there's such a huge drop off between the ACL to ACT? I just don't recall. It's been a while since I looked at that information. Thank you.
Sure. So the fishing industry has requested, for economic reasons, they'd like to see the quotas kept at status quo. So these quotas are the same commercial quotas that have been in place since the 2000s. So it's the same quota that's been in place for over 20 years, even prior to us starting to implement the OFL ABC process. So the landings levels have been substantially lower than the ABCs and the ACLs in recent years. They're only landing about a quarter of that ACL.
Thanks for the question. I'll go to Jim Gilmore, and then I got Anna and Joe.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Jess, for a good presentation. As I was reading through this, it just seems to be a little bit of a disconnect, because as you look at the longer term trend in the population, whatever, it just, and we've seen this in New York for many years, this steady decline in the population. And it's gone down to, significantly less it was a decade ago. And then you see we haven't done surveys in the last couple of years, and then there's no survey plan. So it seems to be there's something going on in terms of the overall population, but then our reaction to that is not even to do any surveys. So it's kind of like, what, you maybe enlighten me a little bit as to why we shouldn't be a little bit more concerned about that decline. And secondly, it just says we're not doing no surveys or plan. Are we going to have a survey anytime in the next 5 years or so? Is even a long-term version of that? Because again, that decline seems to be pretty consistent and something we should be concerned about, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, just I don't know if you had any follow-up or if anyone on, regarding the surveys, Jim. It's obviously a good question. I don't recall if we um, had discussed that in the past on just when we might expect to see something again. Obviously, in general, it's terrifying. I'll go to Chris. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's a good question, Jim. It's certainly something that we've talked about with the staff. As far as we know, there's no plans to do a survey in the near future, and we continue to express our concerns related to that to the Science Center and others. I know that the industry folks have also been pushing, folks to actually get the survey done. So we'll see what happens. But right now, there's nothing planned.
All right. Thanks for the question, Jim. We'll move on. Anna?
Yeah, and sort of to that point, if they lose the Marine Stewardship Council certification, I've got this one in a different question. Curious what they're anticipating the fallout to be from that, and is there an opportunity or funding potentially? Is the industry valuable enough that they would self-fund a survey in order to be able to maintain that certification? So that's one question.
Jessica, yeah, I mean, if you've heard anything and you want to tackle that, obviously, I was going to turn questions over in due time to members of the public, and I know there's a few members of industry here and at least one or two online. So to Anna's question, I'll start with you, but if members of industry want to respond, I'll allow that as well. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll just answer the first. I know the industry spends a lot of money and has invested a lot in those certifications, and it's part of sort of their marketing and promotion of their products, and helps with access to markets that have sort of expectations of those MSC labels. So I think that would be a loss, obviously, to the industry. In terms of what the industry would or wouldn't be willing to do related to a survey, I can't really speak to that.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, and I was curious for the Georgia's Banks biotoxin closure. You talked about the testing that gets done. Do we have any information on if those tests have come back with levels of toxins, or if they're seen a reduction, or is that part of the update that we would be requesting?
I think we can include that as part of the update when we request that. We have a draft letter that we put behind the tab because that was something that industry had raised. We had previously sent a letter, so we included a draft that we could send. In addition, I know our staff and NOAA staff have been tracking these issues with seafood inspection and FDA, and we've extended an invitation to have them come and talk to the council about these biotoxin protocols, and they would be able to answer, I think, questions for the council then. I don't know if NOAA has anything that they want to follow up on or add here.
Not seeing any additions to that. Sorry, sorry. Okay, Greg, you're going in the list. You're going in the list. So next up, Joe Grist, and then I'll go to Greg Hewitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jessica, good presentation. Along the lines of what Jim was asking a minute ago, looking at what is a kind of a concerning trend in the biomass continually dropping, but it's not overfishing. I mean, the rate is so low, it's not that. And so is there any information or any thought from anyone about what is that decline being caused by? Because if it stays on that trend, next couple of years, we're going to be talking about an overfished population. That trend is pretty clear and it hasn't really gone back up. It just keeps dropping. So do we know what what is behind that, or have at least some idea what might be behind that, and maybe tied to that also, because we have to consider the suspension of the minimum shell length. Is there any trend information about the undersized? Are we seeing anything changing there that might give us a clue? Right now, it's to the point where we could do the suspension, but is that trending up? So, do we have any clues here? Because this is looking concerning.
So I can start answering this, and it might be appropriate to ask Mike Wilberg from the SSC if he has any comments as well on what the SSC had discussed. Both for surf clams and ocean quahogs, both of the assessments are length-based. They tend to be a little bit scale uncertain. We know in the surf clam fishery in particular that a lot of the high density beds that were available when the fishery started to first fish on them, like many of those have been fished down, which is sort of part of the signal that you see in that LPUE. Where they're fishing a little less efficiently because some of those more dense beds are less available or less available near shore. So we do see some of those things in that signal. I know in discussions with our stock assessment person, we have talked about the fact that the way the fishery operates, they do tend to operate in what he refers to as sort of hyper stability in terms of landings. So they're fishing on these dense areas, kind of like taking the tip off of a mountain, but you're not always completely sure what the rest of the mountain is looking like. So without an assessment, it's hard to see some of those changes in terms of the population and demographics without all that other information. Because if you're just looking at the fishery information, you might not get a perfectly clear picture just because of the way that they fish. So there are some things going on there. There are some signals. I think that's something that the SSC talked about a bit, mainly for ocean quahog, but we did talk about it a little bit for surf clams during the meeting. So if Mike's on the line, maybe he has something else to add that I missed.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, if you're there, actually, Mike, if you don't mind, I'll do a quick intro. Paul, as chair, is not able to join us for this meeting. Mike Wilberg is on. He's the vice chair of the SSC. So, Mike, we're happy to have you. If you have anything to add, please jump in. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
Excellent. Well, it's a pleasure to be here this morning. And just to speak to that, that's a concern that the SSC has been discussing for as long as I can remember with surf clams as we've been setting ABCs for them. The main thing that has given us confidence in setting our ABCs is that we think the survey that's done has been quite good. But the SSC is very concerned that there's not really a plan to or a fixed schedule to reinstate it and get it back going on its regular schedule. That said, there's quite a few ideas that have been floating around as to why the population seems to have been declining. But overall, we don't think that the commercial LPUE is necessarily reflective of the whole stock. And that's really, I think, how you square the results of the assessment and the management advice with some of the individual information pieces going into it. So hopefully there's something in there that's helpful.
Great, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. It certainly was for me. I hope that was helpful for you as well. So I have one other hand up along the table, so I'll go to Greg Hughes.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that last conversation. I can speak for our area, the New Jersey area. Growing up as a kid, the place we used to fish for the clams and everything, the areas are gone because of beach replenishment within that 3 mile area. So all the beds and everything are now mud for the most part, up and down from the central part of New Jersey to the north there. I can't speak for New York, but I know some of those areas have also been touched on as well. So a lot of the areas as we were growing up that they did clam on and everything are gone. Okay. And what's there now is mud. So there's no place for them to exist at this point. So that is definitely played into it on our end. I mean, it's just not there anymore. The other question I had was you talked about the Delmarva and the 3-inch clam there. What's the rationale behind that? If, I understand it's a slow growing clam, but why are they looking to take something if the biomass is dropping and taking a smaller clam as well with that? What's the purpose of that? Thanks.
So there have been some studies that have come out looking at thermal tolerance of larger clams, and the larger clams tend not to be as heat tolerant as the smaller clams. So in some of these higher temperature areas, they've indicated in some of the work, I think it's Rutgers has done, indicated that they're not reaching as high of a maximum size, although they do seem to be fast growing in terms of growing through their first few years of life, based on some of the papers that they've provided. I haven't waded through all of those, but I think that's the general idea of it.
Yeah, thanks for that response, Jessica. I saw something posted in the chat that I think kind of the publication that speaks to some of that as well. Further questions from council members? Not seeing any. As I mentioned, I would like to give industry a chance, or the public a chance. Any questions on what has been presented on surf clam so far? Yeah, we have a few hands. Joe, if you mind coming up, and Tom, if you can introduce yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joe Myers. I'm with Sea-Watch International. We are a vertically integrated harvester and processor of surf clams and ocean quahogs. And I appreciate this discussion. There's a lot of lively discussion going on. So I want to thank the council for taking us up and having a lot of good thought and a lot of good thought-provoking questions into this discussion. I won't. There's a lot I could comment on. I could take a lot of time, and I certainly don't want to do that. But I did make some notes on your question on the impact of MSC and what that would mean. So MSC started off as something that was a nice to have, and then customers, both in the retail and in the food service side of our customer base, started telling us that this is something that we needed to have. Because it's international certification and much of the seafood that is sold in the U.S. is imported, MSC is one of those benchmarks that gives seafood consumers and seafood buyers sort of a, if you will, as good of a level playing field as I think they're comfortable with. Well, it's no longer a nice to have. It's a cost of doing business, and it's another tool that we have that enables us to stay competitive in the marketplace. The AP did bring up the issue of imports of seafood, and our clams that we harvest and sell are competing not only with other clams from other countries, they're competing with shrimp, they're competing with other proteins. So that's one of the tools that keeps us competitive in the marketplace. And if we're not able to maintain that certification through our next or upcoming 5-year recertification cycle, if we have to go back and basically do it all over again and start from square one, that is an exorbitant cost. It's a lot of money. It's probably in excess of $100,000, if not a couple $100,000. It's in the 6 figures to do that. So that's why it's so important that we stay within the stuff that's easier to do in maintaining the original certification rather than having to jeopardize going back and having to do the certification all over de novo from square one. In terms of the willingness to fund the survey comment, I just wanted to let you know that would be a major shift in the social contract paradigm that we've all operated with U.S. fisheries across the country. You know, Mr. Pentney, when you swore in the new council members today, you mentioned managing fisheries for the good of the nation. This would, on first read of that would go against everything we've operated with how we manage fisheries in the U.S. and the part that is the management of the public good, and then the fringes of what the industry and other groups do to help backfill the research needs that are needed when they're needed. So I could just say I can't tell you what would happen or who would, what other companies would do, or even what our company would do at this point, but I can just tell you that would be a big shift in the social contract that we've all operated on for a very long time, if not since the inception of MSA. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Tom, if you go ahead.
Thank you, council members. Good morning. Really don't have any questions, but I wanted to add a little bit of context. So with the possibility of self-funding a survey, there's a couple of things that the stock assessment folks have communicated that are barriers to getting surveys done. And it's not only money, but it's personnel. The last few years, there's been a lot of people at NOAA let go, and they don't know how easy or hard it would be to actually get those survey folks, get enough of them on a boat for a 2-3 week stint to even be able to do a survey. Addressing the reduced catch rates. George's Banks is inaccessible to other companies besides Sea-Watch because Massachusetts has a real hard time signing MOUs to let other companies land in Massachusetts and truck to other states. I went through a process at least 2.5, 3 years trying to get a simple MOU with Massachusetts, and it was nearly impossible. It was impossible. Back in 2019 is when the model ordinance was changed by the ISSC that would allow the MOUs not only to be between the harvester, the processor, and the state, but they changed that so it would be between the harvester, the processor, and NOAA. So with NOAA involved in that, and industry was a big push to get this done, the thinking was NOAA would not let a state drag their heels for 2 years to sign an MOU, and then in the end just wouldn't sign it. I mean, it was impossible to get Massachusetts to sign an MOU with Surfside Foods. Again, we have the Great South Channel that has higher catch rates for those smaller boats in southern New England, that a lot of that is not getting utilized. So we have George's Banks, the Great South Channel, Southern Virginia. So it's not only that the clams are small, as Jessica mentioned, because of the heat tolerance, these clams are never going to get legal size, right? And a few years ago, Surfside went down and we harvested a large percent of the surf clam landings that year. And in doing that, we brought the total small clams landed right up to 29+%, right under that 30%. So that really scares the industry that there would be a possibility of reintroducing that size limit, because when you reintroduce that size limit on the dock, the enforcement isn't looking for a 10%, 20%, 30%. They're looking for a set number, 50 clams in a cage, and you lose your whole load. Okay, so that would be a you know, we would be going backwards 20 years if that happened. Um, on the Southern Virginia clams, industry has talked about trying to get that on the agenda so that that could be discussed over the next 2 meetings and maybe get a framework action where it wouldn't be an area closure or a area management measure, but defining what areas that these clams are growing slow, just like we have a biological we have a biological out if the beds are so dense, the clams aren't growing, right? Well, it's the same thing with the warming waters. If it's a biological thing that's keeping the clams under that size limit, we feel that to achieve maximum sustained yield for the fishery, that would be a way that industry would be able to get to those clams, and they wouldn't be down there dying of old age. The interesting thing about Virginia is that these clams really weren't even identified as being a high dense area until the Rutgers crew went down there and they did a focus survey on the Dominion wind energy area to look at what's in that wind energy area before construction started. Everybody involved in that survey was absolutely blown away. They thought they had no idea that there was that mass amount of clams down there. And when our boats go down there, we're doing 8-10 times the catch rate down off of Virginia as we do off of Jersey. So between Georges Banks, the Great South Channel, Southern Virginia, there are areas of high dense clams that we're just not able to get to right now. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Bobby, did you have a follow-up there?
Actually, yeah, it would be a question for Tom, if that's allowable. So, I knew years past, going way back, many decades past, back, there was a prominent surf clam fishery in that Southern Virginia area. Excuse me. Now, historically, I mean, that was before a lot of the regulations went in place, but what was the average shell size then? Meaning that, has there been a change into where now the size and age on a clam, I guess that's what you would call it. I'm not quite sure how you use that metric, but the animal itself is not, it's growing slower in the sense that the shell is not growing as fast, but at the maturity level and all that would be, if there's no change there. But in the years past, in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, when there was a fishery there, was it a smaller clam? I mean, has it always been an issue that just where it was that fishery disappeared for so long that nobody really paid attention to what that size was, or is this something that's relatively new in the last few years?
No, sir. This is relatively new, and I actually started my fishing career fishing out of Chincoteague, Virginia, down that way. And historically, the clams were huge, right? But they were further inshore, and the research at one time said these clams in this area aren't coming back, right? Well, they did not come back inshore. These are in much deeper water where you have where it's cooler water, but because of the Gulf Stream, you still get these regular warm eddies that come in and just they literally shut down feeding for an amount of time before that dissipates. So it's really a different situation for the clams that are there now compared to those in the 70s and 80s.
Thank you both for that response. I don't see any other hands in the room. We do have one online, and that's James Fletcher. So Jim, go ahead. Jim, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Jim, I still can't hear you. We'll come back to you. We do have one other hand that came up, so I'm going to go to Monty Rome. Go ahead, Monty.
Yeah, a good day to all of you at the council. My name's Monty Rome. I'm a vertically integrated small processor of surf clams. And concerns me that the MSC is in any jeopardy at all because of the lack of survey work. So my thought is, based on all the years that we've had in recent years, a high level of observer coverage, whether it be for fish or clams, we seem to be good at it. And I believe that, of course, the survey vessels that are currently engaged in survey work are very expensive vessels to operate, between vessel operations, crew, and all the costs associated with that. And I believe it should be, we should take a good look at industry, not industry funded. Industry funds plenty. So I believe that government should take a look at how to charter these boats and do the appropriate survey to keep things going. And I think they'd find that it would be a lot less money than paying the government survey boats to do this work and be helpful in continuing to maintain our MSC certification. It's just a comment that I have about that. When it comes to Georges Bank opening, Tom brought up a very good point about the state of Massachusetts. This is where we operate. My company, Intershell, operates here. And it seems to me to stand to reason, if reasonable people would get involved in this opening of Georges Bank, and we get it open so that we can fish there without all these burdensome regulations and protocols, that Massachusetts would probably drop their requirement to get an MOU. If there's no PSP and no concern about it, and we can demonstrate that, I think that might help. So this is just another element of importance concerning Georges Bank, to do our best to get it open. It's been closed just so long. And so many tests have been done that have shown that there is no PSP to be concerned about out there. I think we should always maintain vigilance in determining that it is not there, but to keep it closed for the reason that we don't survey out there. We just have a protocol, and we don't want to spend time, or the government doesn't want to spend time on making a decision to help us with our optimum yield requirement and maintenance of the industry through being able to harvest efficient resources. I think we need to work hard on getting Georges Bank open. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mona. I don't see Jim's hand online right now. Jessica, did you have a follow-up? And then I had another hand, so.
Yeah, just to follow up about the survey. In the past, the clam survey had been conducted on the Albatross of Bigelow, which were NOAA vessels. However, in recent years, it was conducted using a commercial platform that was contracted. So it was a commercial vessel that was used. One of the limitations, and it was a larger commercial vessel, and one of the issues was having a vessel that was set up to carry NOAA personnel to do the biological sampling on board. you know, a lot of the clam vessels are not designed to carry large numbers of crew, just the way that they operate with the hydraulic dredges. So you have to have a vessel contracted that's large enough to carry enough personnel, you know, on these fishing legs to be able to collect all the biological information.
Yeah, much appreciated. I saw a hand from the Science Center. So Nicole, if you had a follow-up to that as well, go ahead, please.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nicole Cabana. I'm the acting director of the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. I did want to say that we do want to do these surveys, and we have chartered industry vessels in the recent past, and that is what we would like to do in the future. We're currently not funded to do it. We continue to request funding to be able to resume these surveys. And at this point in time, we need both funding and staff. We've had a loss of our survey staff as well. So we continue to advocate for both and hope to be able to pick them up again in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anna?
Yeah, so if we're not able to provide the surveys for all those stated reasons, is there a protocol to extend the certification until which point, you know, those surveys can happen, or that's not something that that is potential? Like who's providing those certifications? Is that something that's done by NOAA, or is that it's an international? Gotcha. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. It sounds like you haven't been part of that process, but it sure is fun. We don't have any reps here from MFC. We could potentially, possibly put that on the agenda as a question. I don't know if anyone in industry has had those conversations to be in this unique situation. It's a unique situation for us. You know, we've been told that we may be seeing fewer stock assessment updates. We have butterfish coming up. The SSC has expressed serious concerns about, just dealing with some data updates there. This is a species, relatively long-lived. We've been comfortable with constant catch for a long time. It may seem like one of those places where it's okay to operate without this kind of information. Clearly, that's never okay. We can't be in a position where we're asked to manage without having this kind of information. So, these are surveys that clearly have to come back. But it's a really good question. I think maybe that is something that, we can reach out to that group to get their thoughts on it. I do see another hand around the table, and then Jim, I will try you again, but first I'm going to go to Maureen Davidson. Maureen, go ahead.
Thank you, Joe. In fact, I'd like to ask New Jersey, our neighboring state, if they have continued to do their surf clam surveys. New York has not conducted a surf clam survey in over 10 years because we can't get a vessel. We have put out bids. We have not gotten appropriate vessels that would be able to conduct the survey. And so as a state, we have not been able to do it because we don't have the proper equipment, vessel and stuff. How's New Jersey doing?
So we don't do that on an annual basis. As Greg pointed out, the inshore population just isn't there, probably for a couple reasons. One of those, obviously, we believe was temperature driven. Our intent is to do it, to do snapshots every few years. So we plan to, on a 5-year cycle with some with federal grants, to mix that in every few years, and that's our intent to try and get those state water surveys in. I don't know what that would contribute to industry's information, since we haven't seen anything like that. But as Tom Dameron pointed out, if you're not looking, you have no idea what you're missing. So it is important for the state. We do intend to continue to do those snapshots maybe every 5 years. Okay, so I see a few hands. Since we were doing questions from the public, Jim, do you want to try your mic again?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you. Go ahead.
Okay, I've been chasing electric gremlins in the house, and maybe I found him. My point is that from the North Carolina line south, we had surveys and we've done away. Is there any way the council could put a line at the Virginia North Carolina line and say any clam south of that line would not be considered whatever the scientific name of the surf clam is? I've been after this since the 80s when the clam, well, I guess when the first clam plan went in. And I saw Elmer Willis Brothers Seafood, run out of the clam business by the Mid-Atlantic Council. Whether it was intentional or not, it was done. And now I see that the council has given the whole clam process to probably 6 or 8 dealers. And we're not getting honest surveys. We're not getting honest science. And the American public deserves to have the clams available to them. So my question for the clams south of the Carolina-Virginia line, what would it take to draw that line and no regulations be south of that line? Thank you. James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association.
All right, Jim, thanks for your question. I think it's something that we've attempted to answer before, so I'll look either to Garfo or Jessica. Any response to that? They're pointing at each other, so. Go ahead, Jessica. Thank you.
That's fine. Mike's not talking, so I guess it goes to me. So the management for Atlantic surf clam, we don't manage by subspecies. So right now, the southern surf clam is considered a subspecies of surf clam, of the overarching Atlantic surf clam. So we don't have a specific differentiation in there. If there was other information that became available and was published that showed that these were separate species, or the council needed to reevaluate how they manage by species, that's something that could occur. There isn't a specific line, I think, that would differentiate even between those subspecies, because that southern surf clam has been found off the coast of Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey. So they've already been found in a number of places. I think you've seen presentations on that from Matt Hare from Cornell University. So it really isn't as clean cut as of an answer as just drawing a line and saying this species is here and this one's there. So
Very much appreciated. Thank you. I have one other hand, and that's from our New England liaison. So Ted, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I'm far from knowledgeable on the clam industry or fishery, but it seems like we're at a hinge point with biomass and what's going on. I was wondering if Nicole we've contracted out, and the Science Center has contracted out and used industry vessels in the past. I'm wondering if there's what the comparative costs are between using the Bigelow and using an industry vessel. Obviously, there's some constraints, but that's the line I was thinking along anyway. And I'm listening to the comments about the social contract and industry's reluctance to get into an industry-based survey, but I believe we're in a time period where the social contract is changing. And so I was kind of curious as to the cost of using the Bigelow or the Albatross versus the cost of using an industry vessel for the surveys. It seems like the survey needs to continue for a lot of reasons, for a lot of interest groups. So I'm kind of interested in the comparative costs.
I don't know the day rate for the Bigelow off the top of my head. The way that we sail on the Bigelow is we don't pay the day rate. OMAO has a number of days that are made available to us, and we compete against the other line offices for time aboard the vessel. And so it's not I don't believe we would be in a position where we would be able to purchase the days on the Bigelow to be able to make it a comparable estimate. Chartering an industry vessel is expensive and the costs have gone up recently, and that's part of the reason that we find ourselves here. So I don't know what I can offer you in terms of like hard numbers. I'd be happy to like pull up the numbers for the operating costs of the Bigelow compared to an industry vessel, but I think the bottom line is we can barely get the sea days we need for the other surveys that we do still sail aboard the Bigelow, and I don't think we're in a position to be able to get more. So I think an industry vessel is, the path that we're on for the foreseeable future.
Thank you for the response. Ted, did you have a follow-up? Okay.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, then it sounds like the Bigelow and Albatross, writ broadly, are just not available. I mean, I would be interested in past costs, approximations, obviously, for the cost of the Bigelow or the Albatross would have to suffice, but you have fixed known past costs for industry vessels. Making that information available to decision makers would be helpful. And then if the reality is that the Bigelow and the Albatross are simply don't have the time and aren't available, cost considerations aside, then that just kind of pushes the ball further down the field that a solution with an industry vessel needs to be found for people that want to continue the surveys, which I think is imperative. I think there's a consensus on that. So the question is, how do we fulfill that imperative? If you could produce numbers from the past experience, that would be a good starting point for a conversation going forward, I would think.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, and I think something that Tom brought up as well is we need to understand staffing and the capacity there as much as anything else, as much as platform, as much as money. I have a couple other hands. I want to go to Mike Wilberg first, representing the SSC. Mike, if you had something to add to this discussion. I had one other hand around the table, which was Jim Gilmore. Then I am going to need to move us on, although I appreciate the discussion. So go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. I just wanted to note that the clam surveys were redesigned, what was it, maybe a little over 10 years ago now, and they were redesigned around the idea of both using a commercial vessel with a commercial clam dredge. And so there was a wholesale shift away from using the smaller hydraulic dredge that had previously been used for clam surveys on the Albatross, to trying to use a more efficient and larger commercial clam dredge. And that was one of the reasons why it was moved in that direction. And the whole new survey is designed around using a commercial vessel.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Mike. Jim, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just and there's more complicating factors to it. I agree, Ted, about using the industry, but we used the industry for many years in New York to do our survey. And then suddenly, when the population started declining and the industry kind of knew about it, then suddenly we get to this one year to do the survey, and the vessel that was doing it, the boat broke. And we said, okay, we're going to miss a year, whatever. Then the next year, suddenly a week before the survey is going to go, the boat broke. And we started getting into that whole thing. So then we went on to try to contract with SUNY Stony Brook to see if they could do it, because maybe have a more objective version of this, and maybe we could throw some money at that. And the cost got so exorbitant that we couldn't use SUNY Stony Brook. So it's that combination of factors that it's expensive, and there's not trying to find objective samplers, whatever. I don't know if there is that in industry, that would be great, but our past experience was it just wasn't there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So as I mentioned, we have two species that we're doing spec setting for. So I do want to move this discussion on. So we'll need a couple motions, one for the specifications for 2027, 2028, and then to consider the request for the surf clam minimum size suspension. So I will look around the table on what is the will of the council here. regarding, we'll start with the spec setting. And I think, Jessica, you went through the recommendations, SSC staff recommendation. I think you may have a draft motion to help get us started.
I do. I'm just pulling the draft motion onto the screen if someone is interested in making it.
Okay, I have a hand from the committee chair. Maureen, you have your hand up?
In a broken laptop in this. Move that the Atlantic Surf Clam 2027-2028 specifications be set consistent with the SSC recommendations for OFL, ABC, and staff recommendations for ACL, ACT, and commercial quota.
Thank you very much. We have a motion from Maureen, a second from Joe Grist. Maureen or Joe, any comments to the motion? Maureen, I'll start with you.
No, I agree with what they said.
Joe?
Same. I think staff's done a good job covering the topic.
Great. Thank you both. We have a motion before us. Any discussion on the motion from council? Not seeing any. I will give a brief moment. Any comment from the public on the motion? Not seeing any. Okay. So I'll try the easy way. Is there any objection to the motion? Not seeing any. Any abstentions to the motion? Not seeing it. Okay. So Jessica will consider that passed by unanimous consent. So we would also need a motion if we're going to consider waiving the minimum size. So on the suspension of the minimum size, Jessica, do you have a draft there?
I do. I have a draft on the screen.
Okay. So we have a draft. Anyone interested in, Maureen, I'll go to you again. And actually, if you wouldn't mind reading the motion, and thank you.
Move to request the regional administrator suspend the minimum size requirements for surf clam in 2027.
Motion by Maureen Davidson, a second. Joe Grist again. Any comment on the motion, either of you? Well, I was sorry. If the maker and seconder don't have any comments, I'll go to the regional administrator. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks. I'm going to obviously abstain on the motion because it's a request to me, but just for a note that, we heard from the public a request about dealing with these Delmarva Southern clams. This motion does not do anything to address that. I think it is something that the council should take a hard look at. And I guess the best opportunity would be at the next meeting when we start talking about the 2027 priorities, whether the council wants to consider adding that as a priority action for next year, so that we can address the concerns that we heard from the industry. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. I will make a note. I agree. I think that is. I think that's a very appropriate place to take a look at that. And I see Chris nodding his head, so we can certainly do that. So I'll look around the table. Further discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. Okay, so to the public, any comments on the motion? Not seeing any hands. Okay, so I'll ask again. Any objection to the motion? Not seeing any objection. Any abstentions? The service is abstaining, and Mike already gave his reasoning. Thank you. So with that, this motion also passes with an abstention from the service, since it is a request to them. Okay, very good. Jessica, if you wouldn't mind jumping in. Next up, if there's anything additional on surf clam, as we mentioned, we have an intention to put the idea of the undersized clams from the Delmarva on a potential list of action items for 2027. So with that, is anything else on surf clam, or if not, then we can move on.
Yeah, we can move on. We've got that. Okay, shifting gears to ocean quahog. This will go a little quicker. Ocean quahog, the last management track assessment was in 2020. So based on data through 2019, ocean quahog is not overfished and overfishing is not occurring. The total landings in the EEZ, because there isn't a state fishery for ocean quahogs. So the total landings, which is that black line, which is also in recent years covered up by that red line on the graph, have declined over time. So around from around 2000, you see a slight decline in overall ocean quahog landings over time. Again, breaking this all out by area, Southern Virginia, Delmarva, and New Jersey previously were the larger contributors to ocean quahog landings. That has since declined, and now Long Island, Southern New England, and Georges Bank are the larger contributors to the landings in recent years. Landings per unit effort. This is a similar breakdown of landings per unit effort in bushels per hour for each of the individual areas. And that black solid line is the aggregation of LPUE across the year, across all areas. So a much flatter pattern we see here in terms of LPUE for ocean quahogs. For 2026, the blue line are the landings through July 30th. They are very similar to the 2025 landings that we saw throughout that fishing year. Again, that green quota rationing trajectory line is if everything was taken at a steady pace. So landings do appear that they will come in much lower than the overall quota. In this fishery, there is a small allocation, 100,000 bushels, that goes to the main mahogany quahog fishery. The landings in that main area have been declining over time. It's been indicated to us that it was a large set of quahogs, and they were being harvested for a slightly different market, like half shell market. But as those clams have grown up, they've been less marketable in those areas. So there are less fishermen fishing on those over time. But there are still some landings coming in that main mahogany quahog fishery. And this year's landings are probably going to be similar to the prior year. Talked a lot about the survey challenges. Ocean quahog, just to note that 2016 was the last complete range-wide sampling. So that was actually prior to us shifting to the commercial platform in 2018. Again, without those surveys, we'd miss out on that important biological information. The catch limit flow chart for ocean quahog is similar to surf clams, except for the difference of setting 2 annual catch targets. We set an annual catch target for the non-main fishery, so that's the ITQ portion of the fishery, and then an annual catch target for that 100,000 bushel allocation for the main fishery. And that main fishery in the past, when it was much more robust, they actually would lease ITQ. To be able to continue to fish in that area, but that is no longer occurring at these low levels of landings. I'm going to shift gears to Mike Wolberg right now for the SSC to review their recommendations for OFL and ABC. Mike, are you ready to go? I can advance your slides if that works.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Jessica. Please start. So the SSC was tasked with developing ABC recommendations for ocean quahog this year. And so there has been no new assessment, and the most recent full survey was 2016. And so we've had to sort of deviate from past practice to figure out how we're going to deal with this. And this is the first assessment, or first species that you'll hear about our new approach for. And so what we're recommending on this stock is carrying over the 2020 ABC but reducing it by 2% for each year since we had a previously approved ABC. And this 2% per year reduction is based on simulation studies that I'll talk about more in the next slide. But they're basically, it's to account for increasing uncertainty over time as we get farther and farther away from our last accepted assessment. We have a lot of interim metrics that we wanted to look at with this, since the last 2 years for the survey haven't been, or the last 2 legs of the survey weren't implemented in 2025 or 2026, including mostly fishery dependent data, because that's what we thought we would have access to. Next slide, please. So why are we suggesting a 2% per year decline? And so the main idea here is the farther we are away from assessment, the more uncertainty we have. Think of this as how much do you trust tomorrow's weather forecast versus a 10-day forecast in terms of deciding what you're actually going to do that day. And that's essentially where we are. We designed our OFL ABC system that we have around an assumed assessment frequency that has been relatively stable over the last 15, 20 years. And that schedule has now been disrupted. And so we've known for a long time, even when we are developing our ABC control rule, that increasing the time between assessments just in general leads to lower yields, higher probability of overfishing, and a higher probability of becoming overfished. And there's a variety of studies that have looked at this that are published, as well as in the SSC's previous simulation testing of the Mid-Atlantic's ABC control rule. We also looked specifically at this question, and the decline in sustainable catch for increasing the time between assessments was about 2% for each additional year between assessments. And so that's where the 2% number is coming from. Next slide, please. So the SSC considered 2 different options for setting setting ABCs for this species. The first was using projections from the 2020 assessment that had been updated just with recent catch, and then continuing the 2026 specification with a 2% adjustment, but not accepting the OFL and the projections. And ultimately, the SSC agreed that using the projections with only catch updating was unlikely to provide useful information for OFL estimation. The main reason for that is that the catch is not providing the important information that we need regarding changes in abundance or biomass of the population. And also, because the surveys were canceled for 2025 and 2026, we won't have information from a new full survey. There was just the 1 leg of the survey was completed. So because of these reasons, the SSC decided to use the approach where we extend the 2026 ABC, accounting for additional uncertainty of increased time since the last assessment. Next slide, please. And so our main source of uncertainty is the lack of an updated stock assessment and lack of having a complete survey done for the most recent period to give us estimates of stock size. There's other things that are contribute to uncertainty with this species, including that fishing mortality is relatively low compared to other mid-Atlantic species, partially because these animals have such a long lifespan. There's a fair amount of uncertainty in how much biomass is actually out in the population, and it's largely driven by estimates of survey catchability from experiments that have been done. There's not a lot of information on recruitment because it's hard to decompose age composition for this stock. And there's a a fair amount of spatial scale mismatch between the scale that fishing happens at and the scale that the stock assessment is conducted at. As Jessica mentioned before about the fishing being fairly concentrated in relatively small areas compared to this being a fairly widely distributed species. And next slide, please. For our research recommendations, the most important one by far is to reestablish the survey program so that we can get the information that we need to conduct the assessment for this species. That survey really is the critical part of the assessments, the most important piece of information that goes into the assessment. And the rest of these aren't nearly as important as that first one for the SSC decision. So I'll just leave those up there for a second. And I think, is that my last slide, Jessica? I think it is.
I believe so.
Thank you.
Okay. So just summarizing the Quahog SSC recommendations relative to the catch limits. They did not specify an OFL. And then the 27 to 28 ABC was set by decrementing that 2026 ABC by 2% for each year for those 2 years. So the staff recommendations for 2027 and 2028, they were for the same measures that we had in the last specification cycle. So that would be status quo quotas, the 24,689 metric tons, plus a 5% incidental mortality, which is due to the dredge killing clams when it's fished on the bottom. And then that gives us our annual catch targets. In general, we've set that ACL equal to the ABC. It cannot exceed the ABC. So based on the SSC and staff recommendations, this is what these numbers would look like. You've got that 25,924 metric ton ACT. That is combined for both the main and that non-main fishery, and then the commercial quota.
Jim Gilmore's, because I was going to say Paul Rago was supposed to give that presentation, but his boat broke. so thank you, Mike, for pinch hitting. I really shouldn't make light of. It's a very difficult situation for all of us. So we do have that. So thank you both for those presentations. I'll look around the table first. Questions for either Jessica or Mike on what was presented? Okay, not seeing any hands from council members. Oh, sorry. Well, Lori, I'm not sure where to put you, but either way, since we would be moving on to the public, I'll go to Lori. You had your hand up.
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jessica, I'm just not sure when we say that this is status quo, for some reason, I don't see the prior year's specifications. Are these numbers identical to 25, 26, or do these numbers represent a 2% hit compared to 25 and 26? And then I just have a follow-up, please.
So the staff recommendations for status quo measures were just for that ACT and the commercial quotas. So those numbers are exactly the same as what we've had in place for numerous years. The difference for quahogs is we don't have an OFL, and then the ABCs equal ACL is different, and it's based on that method that Mike Wilberg just described with the 2% decrement. Is that clear?
Yes. Okay. So quahogs have experienced the 2% hit based on Mike's explanation. So to that point, I'm wondering going forward, this 2% hit with, I believe we were told there was a 10% cap on that. Is this going to be the procedure for all of our stocks? Like, without looking at them on an individual basis. How's the stock doing in the last stock assessment? You know, some of ours are doing very well with, 300% over. Can we expect this on everything now going forward where we're missing a stock assessment regardless, or is this a debatable topic?
So I think Mike could clarify that 10% cap, I think, has to do with the iSmooth method, which I think is separate from this 2%. But Mike, can you clarify the
Ye-
SSD approach?
Yes, that is correct. So there's two different parts to the approach that the SSC has, at least at this point, tentatively decided to use for these first couple of stocks. You'll see it again this afternoon for Butterfish. The main approach that we had been planning on using was to adjust the ABC based on a recent trend in the survey index. But for this species, we don't have a survey index. And so the second part of it was to say that we know our uncertainty is increasing because it's been a while since we've had an assessment, or we're outside the normal cycle of our assessments. And because of that, we thought it was appropriate to account for that uncertainty as well. And so that's where the 2% comes in. Right now, that is the SSC's plan for how we would approach setting stock assessments in the absence of, or setting ABCs in the absence of the stock assessments that would have been coming in normal cycle. It's still something that the SSC is discussing, how we want to handle it. And I think there's a pretty strong agreement on the SSC that we would really like to do some further study of this part, including some simulation evaluation of whether we think all of the parts of our approach are well-founded based on approaches that are done in other either regions or parts of the world, such that we think it's appropriate and best available science, but it might be able to be better fine-tuned for our mid-Atlantic stocks. And that's the main thing that we'd be looking at with that sort of study.
Okay,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Mike. Thanks, Ori. I don't see any other hands for questions, Jess. Again, we are in the spec setting process. So Jessica, I don't know if again, if you have any draft motions that could get us started. It looks like you do. Okay, so I'll look around the table to see if anyone's willing to make that. And Maureen, I see your hand. Thank you.
Move that the Ocean Cohog 2027-2028 specifications be set consistent with the SSC recommendations for ABC and staff recommendations for ACL, ACT, and commercial quota.
Thank you for that. Do I have a second? There we go. Thank you, Bobby. Appreciate that. So Bobby Rule, any comments from the maker or seconder on the motion? Not seeing any. Okay. So we have a motion before us. Comments around the table from council members. Rich Wong? Rich?
Just trying to figure out why we are handling Cohog differently than surf clam here. Why are we imposing a 2% reduction in the ABC on a Cohog, but not when we didn't do that for surf clam? And I'm a little reluctant. I know it doesn't really make any difference. That 2% hardly makes any difference, but I'm reluctant to set a precedent here to just blindly put a 2% reduction on a stock because there hasn't been assessed. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of what I'm grappling with here.
Okay, I had a couple of hands. I think in the queue we're going to put the regional administrator, but I'm going to go to the other Mike since I saw Mike Wilberg. Your hand went up. Is that in response to Rich's question?
Yes, it is.
Go ahead.
So, so Rich, the answer to that question is that for SurfClam, we were within a normal multi-year ABC we'd already set. So our only decision at that point was, do we continue with our previously accepted recommendation? For Quahog, we were past the end of our previous specs that we had set off the last assessment, and we were actually expecting a new assessment in order to set new ABCs. And so that's the thing that makes them different, is if we had been in the normal cycle, we would have gotten a new assessment and we would have used that to set ABCs for the next spec period for Quahogs.
Great, thank you for that. Very good question, Rich. Mike Pentney?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to abstain on the motion, even though I recognize that the council is kind of bound, is bound, not kind of, it's bound by the recommendations of the SSC in terms of the ABC. And it also doesn't affect the bottom line, the ACT, and the commercial quotas don't change. But I think, Rich Wong raised the question about the 2%. Lori Nolan raised it. I have some serious concerns about the approach that the SSC is proposing to take, and this is the first incident of it with, a 2%. What strikes me as an arbitrary 2% reduction in the ABC. And, we'll talk more about this with Butterfish this afternoon. But it gives me, a serious pause in terms of, one of the things that the agency has to do is make a determination that the council's action is based on the best available science or best scientific information available. We're going to take a hard look at this approach of the SSC, and I think that there are some alternative ways that the SSC could flag risks associated with additional uncertainty due to lack of survey data or decreased frequency of stock assessments, besides binding the council's choices and binding the council decision and sort of imposing what I view, quite frankly, as a policy decision to impose a 2% decrease. So I could speak some more about this, and I was planning to speak more about this in Butterfish because it has an actual impact on the quota available to the fishery. Going to kind of just let this one go for Quahog because it doesn't ultimately affect the quota for the fishery, but very concerned about the precedent and the approach being taken here. So for that reason, I'm going to abstain on the motion and be happy to talk about this issue more. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. So I guess, with elections come consequences. I put my name in the hat and here I am. So let me just try and temper expectations. I do think we need to pace ourselves for this particular conversation for a couple of reasons. One is that, like I said, it looks like the near future is suggesting that this type of ask to be managing without a lot of information is going to be kind of the new norm. I do see Mike Wilberg's hand up, but I just wanted to make a few comments. One is that, this is going to be a continuing discussion. Two, some of you may have noticed we're getting close to the lunch hour. I was very hesitant to take a break on the important discussion on surf clam in part that ties into this, and that is, not having surveys and not having an idea of when surveys will come. So apologize to all of your tummies, but we may run a little long here. I'm convinced that we can make up that time later in the day, but we do have some other important public comments as well. As for this discussion on the 2%, I will ask all council members to kind of pace themselves. It will continue in the Butterfish discussion, but we do have Mike Wilberg's hand up, so go ahead, Mike.
Thank you very much. I want to respond a little bit to some of the regional administrators' comments about where these numbers come from. I want to talk a little bit about the SSC process, how we got here as well. And so this has been something that the SSC has known is coming for a while now. And because of that, we've had a separate subcommittee working with the SSC to try to develop an approach that we think is appropriate to make ABC recommendations in the cases where we don't have assessments that we would normally expect. And essentially, this is the approach that we thought was most appropriate based on the science. These sorts of things have been studied all over the world. There's different management systems with different times between assessments. And so we have good evidence from other systems around the world, as well as in the US, that the longer we go between assessments, the lower our sustainable yield is, and the more likely we are to overfish, and the more likely we are to become overfished. And so all of those things, I think, are well established in the literature, and they also are intuitive. It's if you don't have headlights on your car and you're driving at night, you shouldn't drive as fast. That's essentially what it comes down to. Where the 2% comes from specifically is that's for each additional year between assessments, there's on average about a 2% decline in long-term sustainable yield. And that's from the Mid-Atlantic's own simulation study of our ABC control rule. That's where that number comes from. And so I would argue that is a number grounded in science, and it is something that the SSC thought it was appropriate to include. Part of our task is to include a buffer between the OFL and the ABC. That's to account for scientific uncertainty. And the less information we have, the more uncertainty there is. And so, as I said, we are still discussing this. It's a new process for us, and it's not one I think that any of us want to be in, but we're trying to manage this as best we can. And at the end, I'll just add, at the end of each of our decisions where we go through and provide our ABC recommendations, the SSC does certify that we believe our recommendation is based on the best scientific information available. And so that is a determination of consensus by the full SSC. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So honestly, getting if I was still at comments around the table or comments on the motion from the public, but further comments around the table? Okay, not seeing any. Quickly, any comments from the public on the motion? Tom? And again, if you could state your name. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Very quickly, I'm curious if this uncertainty from the SSC, Jessica showed a line chart where at the bottom there was management uncertainty before the limits were decided. Is this 2% coming in there, or is that number actually something different?
It should delay. Should pop up on the screen. Is that the chart?
Yeah. So is there management uncertainty right before the last step there? So is this 2% part of that management uncertainty, or is that management uncertainty? Is that due to another way that the fishery is rated?
So the 2% that Mike is talking about is coming off of that ABC. So that's that OFL ABC scientific uncertainty piece. The management uncertainty, we haven't done an explicit adjustment for management uncertainty because the council has considered other factors when they set their ACTs, and that includes market stability, optimum yield, things that the fishing industry have asked, to have the quota set lower. So we haven't, like in other fisheries where we've done an explicit management uncertainty, like percent adjustment, we have not done that here, but there's a buffer between that ACL and that ACT.
Okay, so that's the scientific uncertainty up top.
Okay, thank you. I have one other hand from the public, and that's Pete Hemchek. Go ahead, Pete.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm an AP member, and I'm trying to follow up on Lori Nolan's comment, question and answer. If the ABC is reduced by 2%, and you had that flow chart back up there, that lowers the ACL. But I thought the answer to her question about the quota changing from previous years was that the quota was not going to change from 2026 and 2025. And I don't understand that. It seems like with butterfish, it may be a much more serious problem, but why would not the quota or the ACT also be decreased by 2%?
The quota and the ACT would be kept the same based on the staff recommendations. The 2% adjustment is just to the ABC. In the past, we've set the ACL equal to the ABC. So you see on the screen, those two values are identical. And that's been the general approach the council's taken for the last 10 years. And then based on other factors, which includes the industry requesting that the commercial quotas be kept stable, that 24,689 is the same number that's been in place in this fishery, I think, since the 2000s. And that ACT is just calculated based on a fixed incidental mortality adjustment. So that ACT and commercial quota would not change for 27 or 28, even if the ABC made this adjustment to that based on what's on the screen.
Okay.
Okay, Peter, thank you. We have one more hand, Lori Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With Mike's explanation on why the SS is moving in this direction, he stated the longer you go without a stock assessment, you can sort of expect doom and gloom to happen, right? We're going to start overfishing, things are going to go bad. And this assumption is made globally because you've looked around the world to see what's happened in other places. But I don't think that's a fair approach. I think councils around, we all operate with a certain amount of uncertainty, because some councils are more conservative than others. I don't think the look should be so large. I think we should stay closer to home and be looking at the performance of the species that the Mid-Atlantic manages and how are they doing, rather than doing this global picture to decide what sort of buffer should be put in place when we're missing a stock assessment. I feel the Mid-Atlantic operates more conservative than not. And generally, the council is careful. And I don't think we should be thrown into a pot with a council that might be more lenient. And I'm not trying to throw stones here or point fingers. I just feel we should be looking closer to our own Mid-Atlantic Council performance in general if we're going to start placing these buffers, which I know you said it's based on scientific evidence. But again, I think the picture is too big. I think we need to focus on us and our species and the status of those stocks rather than looking globally. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lori. I appreciate the comments. I see Mike's hand. As I mentioned, I think this is something that we do need to pace ourselves on, Lori. I think, I think the crux of what the SSC is saying is that there's certainly increased uncertainty and that we need to move with caution. Mike, I guess, do you have a follow-up? Again, this is going to be something that we'll be talking about for the rest of the afternoon. Okay. If not, Mike,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Thank you. Just two more quick points to that. We do have some degree of local mid-Atlantic evidence to support this, and that largely comes from two different simulation studies that have been conducted, one specifically on summer flounder and another that looked more generally at species with generalized life histories that ranged from something like a butterfish to something like a spiny dogfish. And so those are the studies that are supporting the 2% value that were adopted for use, at least for the two sets of ABCs that you'll see today. The Pacific Council does also include increasing uncertainty formally in their ABC development. And they do it even starting the year after an assessment is done. And so theirs is consistently applied for every year after an assessment, with that buffer getting wider and wider. Here, we're only beginning that cycle of adding the additional uncertainty to the ABC for the years when we get outside our normal assessment cycle. And so that's the part that is a bit different. But we have tried to tailor this information, or our approach, for what we think are the mid-Atlantic features, including the ABC control rule that the Mid-Atlantic uses.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. All right, I'm going to bring it back to the table. I'll call the question. Are there any objections to the motion? Rich? Okay. All right, so let's take a vote. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those opposed? Abstentions? I have 10 to 4 to 1. I'll look to anyone else who might have been counting with me if those numbers match. Chris says yes. Okay, so the motion passes 10 to 4 to 1. Appreciate the discussion on this. It's tough. It's a tough situation to be in. Okay, so with that, Jessica, I believe we got through the spec setting. Is there anything else you needed on Ocean Quahog?
Not specifically to Ocean Quahog, but for both surf clam and Ocean Quahog, that Georges Bank biotoxin letter. So there was a request from the advisors that the council send a letter to FDA. We dusted off the old letter, freshened it up. There's the draft behind the briefing book. I need an indication from the council that they'd like to send that letter, if you'd like to do that. Anna had raised a question related to, PSP. I think it was you, PSP, in the region, have we seen any positive tests? I know we've had some discussions about them, about how they monitor these things. So we could include a sentence asking them about that as well in that draft, if you think it's appropriate, and then we can send the letter. So I don't think you need a motion, but just some sort of confirmation that we can go ahead and get that out the door.
Absolutely. So I'll look around the table. I see Maureen. Did you have a comment to that?
Yes, thank you. I think it's important to find out what sort of results were found from the testing that was done on the clams taken from the Georges Bank. At the time when that initially happened, New York refused to accept any of the clams, allow them to come into New York State. The concern with our shellfish sanitation staff was that if you did get a positive on any of the clams that came in from Georges Bank, what did you do with the clams? In New York State, they would have to become solid waste and be thrown into a landfill. They could not be returned back to the water. And so we got some pushback, and then we said, fine, just you can't land those clams here. So I am interested in knowing what kind of results were found from those tests. Thank you.
Anyone else around the table or any concerns of adding that? Not seeing any. So Jessica, I would take that as, yep. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, so we did have a few other things. I think hopefully folks had a chance to see a letter that came from Danny LaVecchia and LaMonica Fine Foods. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like Danny or Peter were able to make it, but I do know that Peter is online, and I think we might have some comments on the Great South channel as well. But Peter, I see your hand up. Did you want to address the letter?
Yes, very briefly, please.
Yep, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been asked by Mr. Dan LaVecchia. He's the president of LaMonica Fine Foods. They hand chuck surf clams. And I'd like to draw the council members' attention to the fishery performance report on page 3, the Iowa State project / contract, which was awarded to explore ways to remove barriers to entry and utilization of the quotas. And in response, when this RFP first came out early in 2026, Mr. LaVecchia wrote a 3-page letter, pages 53 to 55 behind tab 1, in which he very emotionally expresses his somewhat resentment about the idea that current ITQ holders are setting up barriers to new entrants into the fishery. And he very emotionally documents what he and his family went through for many years to build up LaMonica Fine Foods, all the hardships and all the debt that he had to take on to establish his ITQ allocation. Now he does lease a lot of ITQ. So to imply that he as a company is setting up a barrier to new entrants is that's something that he feels very strongly against that statement or that belief. And I guess this will come up at your next meeting and be a part of your 2027 work plan. And the industry really wants these contractors hired for $233,000 and a little bit more to talk to the current industry companies to understand exactly what is going on with unallocated ITQ allocations. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I appreciate that. I hope everyone had a chance to read the letter. I'm sorry Danny wasn't able to be here in person to make comments as well. But as Peter mentioned, that letter wraps up that there's a hope from LaMonica that this letter be shared with the council, which it has been, and in particular the Surf Clam and Ocean Quahog Committee. Again, it has been. And then the request that that this RFP stays in close contact with the AP and industry in general, and I certainly support that, and that's something I think we could move forward with. So thank you for your comments, Peter, and please thank Danny for the letter. There may be some other public comments. As I mentioned, we had some discussion about the Great South Channel habitat management area. So I do want to give some time if there are any comments on that. Go ahead, Sean, and if you could please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. My name is Sean Key, and I represent the Saving Surf Clam Coalition. We have, as many members of this council know, we filed a petition to reopen the Great South Channel Habitat Management Area. A couple members of the coalition, Nantucket Sound Seafoods and Intershell International, have been involved in cooperative research with the Coonamessett Farms Foundation. They've just issued their latest report, and I think they were looking at the Davis Bank area for mapping and assessment of hard surfaces, epibionics, things like that. Previously had done the Rose and Crown. They found the areas highly dynamic, as everyone knows, characterized by mobile sand waves. But I think one of the outstanding findings just from this recent report is that the compensation fishing had occurred in just under 9 square kilometers. It yielded $3.2 million worth of surf clams. That's almost, in the Rose and Crown, almost 400,000 per square kilometer. You've heard a lot today about people trying to scratch in areas, and I would just point out that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has been particularly concerned about this because a lot of the smaller boats that can't fish on George's Bank, can't deal with the seafood testing or with the conditions out there, have been moved to state waters, and they're concerned about both excessive effort and potential impacts on their habitat, whereas this council has been supportive of the effort. And I think that it's a good way to handle it, because this is an area that a fishery that's managed by the Mid-Atlantic Council, but the area was closed by the New England Council ostensibly to protect cod, essential fish habitat, but all recent indications are the cod have abandoned the area because the waters have become too warm. And there's a question anyways whether a clam dredge moving through predominantly sandy areas with very little epibionics on the seafloor could have a impact on essential fish habitat that would be adverse. That is more than temporary, more than minimal, and not temporary, because the research has shown that these impacts are temporary and they occur over a very small area. With that, I would urge the council. Finally, the administration has put this on their list of priorities for the New England Council, but I think that if this council could just write a letter to the Secretary of Commerce and the Assistant Administrator in support of initiating a rulemaking that would lead to the reopening of the area, that would be greatly appreciated. The industry, and it'll help this council meet its Magnuson-Stevens obligation to achieve optimum yield from this fishery. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate the comments. So just look around the table regarding that. If there's any interest by the council, we've certainly done that in the past. Todd, did you have something?
So, yeah, I've worked with Jessica. We've got a draft motion proposed.
Okay, so we do have a draft motion here.
All right, my screen hasn't. There we go. So move to send a letter to the Secretary of Commerce requesting that all areas that are closed to clam dredging within the Great South Channel Habitat Management Area be reopened.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Bobby Rule. We have a motion and a second. Look around the table. Discussion around the table. Mike Pentney.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to see this motion. Yeah, so I mean, I'm sorry to have to say this, but I think this is wholly inappropriate for the council to weigh in this way. The area was closed by, the sister council, New England, after undergoing a very thorough review of the impacts of hydraulic clam dredging on habitats, the various essential fish habitat designations within the area, a multi-year process to determine that the Great South Channel become a habitat management area. And so they closed the area for cause after undergoing, serious consideration and analysis. They then worked directly with the clam industry over the period of about 1.5 years, 2 years, to identify subsets of the Great South Channel habitat management area that could be reopened for some forms of fishing access, with the expectation that, and this was explicit in the framework adjustment, that some of the areas would be dedicated for research for the clam industry to continue to operate under exempted fishing permits in order to provide additional detail that the New England Council could consider before making any further changes to the access for the clam fishery within the Great South Channel habitat management area. As was noted, that process has been ongoing for several years. The agency has issued a number of EFPs in consultation with the New England Council to address specifically the information requests of that council before they make any additional considerations. As a 2026 action priority for New England Council to review all of the available information relevant to this specific question about whether access to the area could be expanded for clam dredging. That process is ongoing. The council has not completed its review, but I think is getting an update in September on that process. And I would expect that if the information is positive, that the council would potentially put as a 2027 action to make some changes that they determine are warranted to fishing access in the Great South Channel habitat management area. This motion completely bypasses the New England Council process under the Magnuson Act to review that information, analyze the science, consider the best available information about the impacts of fishing on the New England Council's essential fish habitats and the potential impacts of that fishing on their essential fish habitats in this area. Going sort of above their heads to the Secretary of Commerce and suggesting that all areas within the habitat management area simply be reopened. I don't believe this council has done any analysis to justify and support such a determination. So I'm really not sure how this council can sidestep the entire process that the New England Council has gone through over multiple years to look at this issue and study the issue and simply suggest that the area be reopened. I will obviously be opposing the motion.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I mean, I'm clearly handicapped and biased as chair. I think a similar motion for such a bypass had come up before I was chair, and I think for some of the reasons that the regional administrator has mentioned, even not as chair of a council, the notion of bypassing another council is very concerning to me. I think something or things that the regional administrator mentioned, could suggest a way forward. I know it's very tough to constantly be encouraging another council to take action and to look at stuff. Obviously, that hasn't been ignored. It just hasn't resulted in exactly what some of us on the mid are hoping for. But there may be another way forward with their upcoming action plan stuff. But we have a motion before us. Any other comments around the table? Maureen?
Thank you, Joe. I was concerned when I realized that this kind of letters asking that another council's decision be overturned. Have we communicated at all with the New England Council to let them know how we feel about this, or we just kind of go over their heads and ask that this action be taken place? I was also surprised that it said all areas that are closed should be reopened without sort of examining. Aren't there areas that need to be protected? Are there areas where we can safely use a hydraulic dredge? I think this is a little premature and kind of overreaching, sort of like, we're going to tell on you.
So to maybe either Jessica or Chris on just the history of the back and forth, more so than, whether or not, this motion plays into that, but just maybe just a little history of the back and forth.
Sure. So going back to the original development of the habitat management area, our council urged the New England Council to develop clam access areas within the region as a follow-on action, which is what they did. They had taken up that year and a half working on that framework to identify some clam access areas. We have had opportunities where our leadership have gotten together with the New England leadership and Mid-Atlantic leadership to talk about like a path forward in terms of how we engage on those issues. We do have staff that participate in their habitat plan management teams and other groups to generally track those issues. And as I said, we've been actively engaged in this process as they've been gathering information and reviewing information to determine if they want to move forward with a follow-on action. So I think the mid, and Chris, you were at that leadership meeting as well. That was maybe 4 years ago, to talk about that. So we have found some opportunities to meet with them on that, but we as a council haven't directly told them which areas to open, which areas to close, that kind of stuff.
Thank you. I think that's very valuable. Further discussion amongst council members? Not seeing any. Oh, Todd, go ahead.
So I agree it's an aggressive motion, and I think the idea is that we do have a responsibility as the council. We have a history that's here, and I think it's maybe this is a kick the chair, get the attention sort of a proposal. I do appreciate the feedback that we're getting on this, and respect the roles of both councils with respect to this location. But like I said, I think, we do have a place at the table with respect to this fishery. So.
Joe Grist.
If I understood from the regional administrator, New England Council has this coming up though in the next month. They're going to be talking about this very topic. Did I hear that correctly? I'm getting a head nod, so.
Sorry, I'm just checking real quick. I'm looking at the draft. Actually looking at the draft agenda for the September meeting. And looks like proposed September 16th, 9:30 a.m. Habitat Committee report on the evaluation of the Great South Channel Clam Dredge Exemption Program.
Mr. Chair, based on the comments around the table, though I understand the want for this, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here, and I think we need to let New England Council have the opportunity to meet. Let's hear what comes out of that meeting. So I intend to vote against this, or otherwise offer a motion to table it.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that information. I saw Ted, you had your hand up.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, I think this is a strong letter, and without getting into the pros and cons, I know there are people in New England that will fall on each side of the line. And I wonder, and I'm using the word wonder intentionally, if such a strong letter might push people in a direction, a defensive direction that maybe you don't want them to go. So that might be worth considering as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ted. I think you just took on one of the unspoken roles of a liaison, and I very much appreciate that. I really do. So we do have a motion before us. I think we have, a couple ways to handle this. If there isn't a lot of further discussion, I could simply call the motion. We can entertain an alternate motion. Okay, let's call the motion then. All of those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Okay, and one. All those opposed? That's somebody's gonna have to help me count here. $16 opposed. Okay. Motion fails. I very much appreciate the discussion. Yeah, it's an issue where, again, there's obvious frustration from industry, and I think from this council. We'll continue to see where this goes. So I wanted to afford this time. I'll look to Mike Petney. You had a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I just, while I really did not like that motion, I thought it would set an extremely poor precedent for how the councils operate collaboratively and all. I do think there is a significant opportunity for this council to participate with New England Council in its review. Take a look at the results of the EFPs that have been mentioned or are available. Look at the data and the information that the New England Council is putting forward in their review. And I think there's an opportunity to weigh in on what additional subsets of the area could be considered for reopening. What is the rationale for keeping it closed? And provide assistance to New England Council in its decision making to maybe more explicitly take into consideration the needs of the clam fishery for access to this area. So I think there's a strong role for this council to participate in the process, but I do believe in the process that the New England Council is going through to reconsider these areas. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate those comments. Okay, so we're in kind of an odd place in the agenda where I've been trying to cover some of what I have known are important public comments from particularly the industry on the surf, clam, and ocean quahog agenda items. But I guess I'll either look to I guess I'll look to you, Jessica. Is there anything else that that you're aware of that we haven't covered?
Not that I'm aware of.
Great, thanks. Okay. So with that, I think we've hit everything on this agenda item. We are running a bit late, but as I mentioned, I think we'll be able to make that up. I still want to give us a full hour for lunch. And during that time, I will try to get a helmet and goggles for our SSC vice chair who's filling in. So we will break. Stephen, if you could put it on, we'll return at a soft 1:30 hour. Thank you.